It's gotta be on site. It has to be. Yeah.
So it doesn't do this.
Yeah, I think you
But
can.
now I just get out.
How was your law? Well, I'm actually just to about kindness and all doing things well. Yes, and assume could be
a natural
supporters. Yeah.
We are definitely grown that way. That's, yes, that's right.
So, you know, you can.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but I think that's starting to change a bit. People are finding out. We're not gonna. Yeah, I think the way that the political landscape is set up, she wouldn't, because current city Democrat. It would seem like infighting that she had to try.
No, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, you know, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe that's part of the plan. That could be. Yeah, maybe. Yep.
Want to make sure everything is gonna be good here. You can sort of see what's here.
Okay,
If you want me to move that back a little so you can see, but it should, whatever you see.
Yeah, it's here.
Okay, yeah, just go ahead and do that.
There we go. But I want to
Oh,
back a slide.
now.
That's all the litter from the people that are coming and going on the bottom. It was.
What's that? What's happening? It's so sad. Because it's government. I know. We went to the doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is us.
So you are good. I saw the article. I'm thinking.
Yeah, I keep it, I was last Sunday over here, I church and went to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And this man. I said, uh-oh. People are recognizing me, I really gotta be mindful about what I'm doing. I have to do that anyway. Yeah.
And our memory has a lot of time.
Yeah, and I think the cat's out of the bag on me later on, so. I was very impressed. Yeah.
Let's,
Still playing.
okay. I'm gonna pass those baskets, okay, when she starts questions.
Oh, fine, okay, I'll get them
Okay.
both out then, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and then when I do that, I'm gonna say this basket is on this side, this one is on
I'll
that
make
side.
I'll do that too, I'll say that here now.
Well,
No, okay,
I don't think you have
Okay,
to.
okay.
The people will forget anyhow.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and I still hear music. Yeah. Oh, so yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So I think
What? We need those people up here. I know. Stop when they're supposed to stop. I know. Come down, open the door and tell. Don't. Get us. Don't tell Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know. Sorry, I didn't use it in help just that day. I was. I'm listening.
Okay, we are live streaming, so you can start anytime.
Good morning, people. Hi, we're early birds. I hear music downstairs, so there'll be more people coming from the service, but we're going to get started. My name is Lorraine Jacobs. I'm co-chair of the forum group, and Mark Miller, who runs the computer, is the other co-chair. So thank you for coming today. Just a quick note about baskets. We'll have them at the table, at the door, and they're donations for expenses for the forum. They're directly for the forum. So we have different things, mostly technology and microphones, but we do occasionally have some expenses. So that will be here today, and there'll be time for questions. And today our topic is Milwaukee has a port, and the director will be with us today to tell us about that. And her name is Jackie Carter. She'll be introduced by Juliet, our host.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see people today. Chilly, but worth coming in the sunshine. In 1779, the first sailing ship was spotted from Milwaukee. 1779. It was a British naval ship built in Canada, which was owned by Britain at that time, as you know, and she was called the Felicity. So that was the first sign that there was the big lake out there you could do something with that didn't involve birch bark canoes. Then when Solomon Juneau came here and set up house in 1818, he came from Quebec. He was a French Catholic. Then George Walker came from Virginia in 1834. Then Byron Kilbourne came from Connecticut. He was raised in Ohio, and he was a canal builder, among other things. And then in 1837, there was a depression, and the only bank that survived the depression was a Scottish bank that was created by George Smith in Chicago, and he brought Alexander Mitchell here from Scotland to set up a branch of the Wisconsin Marine and Fire Insurance Company, because banks were illegal in Wisconsin, because there were so many people who came from the East Coast, set up a bank, took people's money, and left town. They were called the Wildcat Bankers. So Mitchell was sent here. The bank was an insurance company by name, but actually it functioned like a bank, and it was all backed by Scottish investors. And so it survived that depression. And he, of course, both built the first pier and also created the business that became the railroad that came from Chicago to Milwaukee. And I've taken the train all the way to the West Coast and got to see a model of the Amtrak Empire Builder yesterday at the train show at the Dome. So that was cool to see that. So if you had stood round about where the Harley-Davidson Museum is right now, in the early 1800s, there would have been nothing to see except marshes and nothing to hear except frogs. That was Milwaukee 205 years ago. If you had looked east, you would have seen a forest, but it would not have, 30 years later, 40 years later, it would not have been a forest of trees. It would have been a forest of schooner masts. You couldn't even see the water because there were so many schooners tied up. And the little small houses locally were the houses of the carpenters who built the ships and created them in the port here. It's been very lively for a long time. Almost 200 years of activity. And there's a lot in the 4th edition of John Gerda's book, The Making of Milwaukee, which came out 6 years ago, the latest edition. And you'll see a lot of information about the beginning of the lakefront and how it changed over the years. So I hope that you'll get a chance to dip into that at the library. And so I'm going to let Jackie talk about herself, because that's what we're here for, to listen about what is the port now, what does it look like, how busy is it, and how much does it matter in the world economy? And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of information from her. Thank you so much for coming today.
Well, good morning. I laugh at this title, but I'll tell you where it came from. So my name is Jackie Q. Carter. I'm Director of Port Milwaukee. I've been in that role about a year now. And when I was appointed, because the Port Director is appointed by the mayor because it is a department of the city. And I was appointed in the role, and all my friends saw it on the news and on Facebook, and they were cheering. They were like, "Congratulations, you got a promotion. We have a port." And so that was the response I kept getting. Or when I would go out into spaces and people would say, "Didn't I just see you on the news? What was going on?" I said, "Well, I was just appointed Director of Port Milwaukee. We have a port." And so Milwaukee Has a Port is the title of this. And so that it was born. And so my goal as director is to make sure that we don't continue to ask this question, but people become really aware of this great asset that we have in our city. So I'll start out with just a little bit of history. Port Milwaukee was established as a Great Lakes port in 1835. And in 1913, the Common Council approved acquisition of Jones Island, which I'll show you what that means in a slide a little further down. But they approved acquisition of that in 1913. So again, the Port of Milwaukee is a department of the city of Milwaukee, just like Department of Public Works, just like parking services, we are a department of the city. The difference between us as a city department is those departments, when you get your tax bill, there's a portion of that tax that goes to cover those departments. The port is what we call an enterprise fund. And what that means is we raise revenue to cover our expenses. So for every dollar that I put in my budget every year, that I'm going to need this much money to operate the port, there's also a dollar of revenue that must be raised. And we'll talk a little bit about how that happens. In 1921, there was a rail line established at the port that now has grown. We have about 14 miles of rail track that is owned by the port. And that doesn't mean 14 continuous miles. That means there's 14 miles of track where there's track that comes in and out of the port, but there are multiple lanes of track where the tenants are able to operate and move their cars back and forth onto their different properties. In 1970, Summerfest became home or made its home on Port Milwaukee property. So that's something a lot of people don't know, that Milwaukee World Festivals, Henry Meyer Festival Park, that is part of Port Milwaukee's property. So we are the landlord for Summerfest. In 2004, Lake Express, you might be familiar with the ferry that travels from Milwaukee over to Muskegon, Michigan. That is also a tenant of Port Milwaukee, but that was established in 2004. In 2011, we became grantee to Foreign Trade Zone 41. And what that means is if there are manufacturers who have products or pieces of what they create in other countries, they can become a Foreign Trade Zone operator, which basically treats those commodities that they ship in from other countries as if they're still in the other country. So they're not taxed as highly, the tariffs on that. So it kind of offers some relief on some of the fees that you have as a business that needs parts from other parts of the world. And then in 2014, the MS Hamburg offered their first stop in Milwaukee to kind of kick off our establishing the cruising for Milwaukee as part of the Great Lakes Cruising. So that's just a little bit of the history. How the port looks today. So that picture you see there, when we talk about Jones Island, the portion of that picture that you see surrounded by the three parts of it are surrounded by water. That is what we call Jones Island. Okay, so the port is our property goes from right at the bottom of that picture, you'll see really close to Russell Avenue on the south side, up to the steps of the Calatrava, and that's about 467 acres of land. We break that into the North Harbor Tract and the South Harbor Tract. So anything on the north side of the Hone Bridge, that's the North Harbor Tract. So that's going to be Summerfest, that's going to be Discovery World, that's Harbor House. Those are all Port Milwaukee tenants. And then on the south side, that is our South Harbor Tract, Jones Island. And a lot of our commercial activity happens on that side of the bridge. Well, I'll kind of step over. So this is what I talked about. This is the commercial side. Here, up here where it breaks, this is where you go right to the home bridge, and then this is like Sunset and Harbor House and Sterling World. Those properties are there. Okay. All right. And we handle about 2.5 million metric tons of cargo on an annual basis. So, and I'll get into what some of those commodities are. The way that our port is set up, again, we're a department of the city. Our work is overseen by a 7-member board of harbor commissioners. And those harbor commissioners, 6 of them are appointed by the mayor, and 1 is a representative of the Common Council. So our current harbor commission, the council member that represents the city of Milwaukee is Alderman Mark Borkowski. Some of you might know him. And he's going to be retiring, so we'll get a new member of the council soon. We have a staff of about 21, and I know that seems really small. Like, how do you manage all of that property? So we are a landlord port, which means the difference between us and something like the Port of Miami. Port of Miami is like an operating port. So they hire all the folks that take care of all the operations in the port. As a landlord port, we lease land to private businesses who then do some of those operations. So they're the ones who are bringing in the cargo, they're scheduling the ships, they're brokering those deals. And then our 21 staff are the folks who make sure that the property is maintained, that there are support services available. So if somebody's bringing in some heavy cargo and they need cranes to lift that cargo off, our staff, we own those cranes and we will operate those cranes to help support that business. So that's how we do it with such a small group. We have about 20 tenants, and those tenants, I'll share a little bit about who they are in a few later slides. But back to the railroad, we have 2 Class 1 railroads, so Union Pacific and Canadian Pacific. And what that means when we talk about Class 1 railroads, that a railroad is classified based on the amount of revenue that they bring. So when you get to Class 1, those are some of the top railroads in the nation. And that means that they have some really broad reach. So they can do east-west, they can do north-south, and you really want to have those railroads that have a lot of reach at your port. Some of the equipment, we have 6 cranes that we own and we operate. We have folks on our team that are certified to operate a crane. And so when businesses need that capability, they don't have to go to a private company to rent that equipment. We already have it, and we also have the folks who can operate it for them. And then we have some covered storage, we've got lay down space, these are all the things that we offer to a tenant. And then we are open year round. I know that with the ice coming in the lake, folks sometimes think that commerce will stop. We actually don't. Now, some of our vessels are not able to move because we do have international vessels that come all the way in from the Atlantic Ocean through the Seaway. The Seaway does shut down for about 3 months. So from about December 31st to usually the end of March. This year, the Seaway is going to open March 22nd. So we'll start to see that international traffic coming in again. But we are open year round because there's Laker vessels that just stay in the lakes, and they're just traveling, bringing cargoes from one lake port to another. But we also have access to the inland river system through the Mississippi. We are the northernmost point on the inland river system. We like to talk a lot about our economic impact because some folks think, well, you guys bring in ships and cargo and there's a lot of salt down there, but really, what is the port? Well, the port, because of the work that we do and because we exist here in the city of Milwaukee, we support about 1,300 jobs. That represents about $88 million in wages to folks who are working, and then about $106 million in revenue. That includes the revenue that the port brings in, as well as those private businesses. And a little bit about how we're organized. So we have 3 different areas of business that we focus on. So one, and our most primary, being commercial, doing commercial business. So the photo you see there, that is the use of a crane or a crane being used to lift some super yacht structures off of a vessel. So we like to show this because this is probably one of the coolest cargoes that we've moved. But we do things like that. We do brewery tanks, we do lumber. So if there's a construction project that uses large commodities, we will be able to move that. We also, on the North Harbor tract, have a recreational side of our business. So that's going to be the Summerfest. that's Harbor House, that's Discovery World, that's the Lake Express Ferry. So those are businesses that serve people and not necessarily are looking at moving commodities. And then the newest part of our business, you guys might have seen in the news, Great Lakes Cruising. So the tourism side of our business, and that's growing. So we talked about in 2014, the Hamburg was the first cruise ship that came to Port Milwaukee. Now we're seeing folks like from Pearl Seas to Viking, larger ships, more ships. And so we want to continue to build that business up. And I've got down along the bottom of that slide, just some logos might be familiar to you. Those are our recreational tenants. So as far as our commercial operations, that map you see there is the map of our commercial operations. So all those different color blocks show the parcels that we rent out to different tenants. So again, 20 plus tenants, they're represented by stevedores, and the stevedore is basically the folks who manage getting the cargo on and off the vessels. There's transportation companies, we do some folks that do some packaging, a lot of salt. Some of that salt is used for roads, of course. It's Wisconsin, we know about winter and we need salt for the roads, but there's also salt for treating water and other different uses for salt. And that's where the packaging comes in. There's some warehousing, we store some things. And then we also have some government agencies. So the U.S. Coast Guard is a port tenant. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they're not necessarily housed here, but they do some work here. So we collaborate with them quite frequently. And also the Navy is a tenant of Port Milwaukee. Again, we support over 1,300 jobs. 630 of those jobs are what we would call direct. So that means that they are employed by some business at the port, including Port Milwaukee. Induced jobs, those are going to be jobs for when I, as the port director, as a employee of Port Milwaukee, get my paycheck and go into a restaurant, the folks who are serving me in that restaurant, those will be considered induced jobs because I have an income to be able to pay for those services, right? And then 219 indirect jobs. So those are going to be folks who don't necessarily work for the port, but we need them as part of our business. So that's folks who drive trucks, folks who are, helping to move cargoes kind of as a third party. And then along the bottom, you'll see some of the logos of some of our tenants. So Michael's is homegrown. That's one you're probably really familiar with. The rails are there, Kinder Morgan and different folks like that. And then to get into some of the cargo types and the commodities that we handle, dry bulk, that's going to be considered anything that comes just like stuff that you would shovel into a vessel that's loose. It's not in a bag. It's not in a box. It's not contained in any way. That is dry bulk. So that's going to be salt. That's limestone. That's something called pig iron, which I'm not quite sure what they use that for yet, but it's very small, like pellets. And now Siri wants to join us. So let me move this out. So that's what that is. We also have a liquid cargo terminal. And what that means, we can move liquid bulk. So again, that's not in any kind of container or anything like that. A vessel that has liquid cargo can dock right next to our liquid cargo pier. And there are pipes that will take the liquid off of that vessel and then pipes it underground into one of the properties. So we have a couple of tenants at our port that handle liquid cargo, and that's usually like petroleum products and things like that they handle. Project cargo, again, that goes back to those super yacht structures. You see a couple that the third row pictures, you see those white structures are brewery tanks that were brought in. And those, of course, we see some of that in Milwaukee, but all over the state of Wisconsin, there's been brewery tanks that have been brought in through Port Milwaukee and then taken to a site so that they can be installed in a business. And then we also do break bulk cargo. And that's going to be things like lumber or larger pieces that have to be moved one by one, but are not necessarily those bulk commodities. The one thing to note, we do not bring in maritime containers. And I know usually when we see the big commercial ships, containers is a big picture that we see. Port Milwaukee does not handle maritime containers. And the reason for that is in order to handle those containers, you have to have Customs and Border Patrol at your port to be able to clear those containers and make sure things are, proper and done properly and in order. And we don't have a facility at our port. but that is not off the table. So that might come later. We're hopeful, but we don't have that capability right now. Again, some of the common commodities you see, European steel and salt are really the biggest commodities that we bring in, but we also handle agriculture, which that's one that is growing for us. So we just opened a ag facility in the port in 2023. The DeLong Company, which is a tenant of the port and a partner of ours, went in. We were able to build this facility where they can take agricultural products from this region out into international markets. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But these are just some of the types of commodities that we handle at Port Milwaukee. So when we talk about supply chain, I don't know if you guys remember, but when COVID happened, there was this big supply chain crisis. And I'm glad to say that was not our fault. Port Milwaukee actually turned out to be a support in that area, because there were the large coastal ports were getting bogged down because they had all this cargo that was coming in, and they had all these ships that were waiting. Well, Port Milwaukee, because we can get cargo from the Atlantic Ocean, some ships were able to come in through the seaway, and we were actually able to be kind of a relief to that issue that they were having. Again, we have access through the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway. We've got access to the Gulf Coast through the Mississippi. And when we think about a multimodal port, that is where you see all the modes of transportation come together. So that's water, that's road, and that's rail. And you can get all of those at Port Milwaukee. Cruising. The thing that's exciting about cruising for us, because as I joke about the fact that a lot of people don't know we have a port, cruising was one of the ways that we've really been able to elevate our public profile, because it's something that the average resident can really relate to. They understand a cruise ship. They don't necessarily care where the road salt for winter comes from, right? But they know what cruise ships, when you see that docked at the port in your city, you're like, how did it get here, right? And so that kind of gives us the opportunity to talk about the access that we have through the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway. We have 2 dedicated cruise docks at Port Milwaukee currently. So that first photo you see there is our Discovery World dock. So right behind Discovery World, that is what we call our Pier Wisconsin dock. So right downtown, ideal. I mean, look at that view. Is that not a better way to come into the city of Milwaukee and really see what we have to offer? So that's where our smaller ships come in. So those are going to be ships that have a draft depth of about 16 feet, because that's really what makes the difference and determines which dock these ships are able to go to. So those are the smaller ships. The second photo you see there, if you're familiar with where the Lake Express Ferry Terminal is, that ship is docked directly behind where the ferry docks. And so that is our South Shore Cruise Dock. Those are going to be the medium-sized ships. And so those are going to be anywhere from the 16 up to maybe about 20 feet of depth. And then right next to that, so if you think about where Lake Express is, if you're looking to the south, that's where that ship you currently see is there. On the east face, that parcel of land is vacant right now. We are going to be working to build a 3rd cruise dock, and that is going to be for the larger ships, so like the Viking vessels, because they require about 26 feet of depth. And right now, those vessels are coming in, they dock in our commercial space. We really want to get them out of there, because if you're familiar with the port at all, MMSD is right next to us. They are our neighbor, and that is not the welcome that we want to offer to residents as they come into our city. And so we want to build this dock and get them out of there. So more to come on that. So for 2023, this is just a little bit of information about what cruising does for us. So we served in 2023 about 6 different cruise lines. That was 9 different cruise ships. There were 2 new ships that entered the market. So we're really excited about that, because that means the message is getting out and people are understanding and they see the value and the interest in our city. We have 30 cruise visits for the season, and 28 of those were what's called a turnaround visit. So what that means is the vessel will end an itinerary in Milwaukee and also start a new one. So in those ships, we get twice the number of people coming through our city, because they've started somewhere in maybe like Toronto or Montreal, and then they end their visit in Milwaukee. They get off, they go to the shops, they go to the restaurants, but then they end their cruising there. And so they're staying in our hotels, they're using our airport. So those are all things that kind of contribute to that economic impact. But then on the other side, there's a group that's getting ready to get started. So they're coming into the city and staying in the hotels. And so we get like 2 bangs for our buck on those turnaround visits. So we like those. For 2023, we saw about 11,600 passengers, and we had our first opportunity to tender passengers. And what that means, Viking has 2 vessels that they bring into the Great Lakes. We only have 1 dock though that can handle a ship of that size. And so on that bottom photo, you see that little orange contraption there. That is a boat that is on the side of the cruise ship. And they load that up with passengers. They can take, from what I understand, about 100 people at a time, get on that vessel. They drop them down. They don't drop them in the water, God forbid. But they lower them down into the water, and then they are able to bring them over the land. So that allows the ship to remain docked out in the harbor, but allows the passengers to still get off and enjoy all the amenities of the city. So that the vessel there, they were let off right down next to Discovery World. If you've ever been down there where the kayaks are, they were able to get off right there. And then again, a perfect entry right into the city. Well, again, our first business is commercial, right? So we are not good. I like to say when salt comes in, we sit it there and it doesn't move. When you're moving cruise passengers, they've got attitudes and opinions and needs, right? And so we really, because commercial cargo is our primary business, when it comes to cruising, we have to have a lot of partners, and we look to people who are better equipped to handle that than we are. For one, we want to make sure folks are safe. And so you look at the Coast Guard, Customs and Border Patrol, law enforcement. And when we talk about that, it's not that we're concerned about safety, but when if you go through the airport, you've got to go through the security and make sure that people aren't bringing on things they shouldn't have, but also that the right folks are getting on and off of those vessels. So that's why they're involved. We also work with some shipping agents. So there are different people. We don't actually book the cruises. We work with the company who then works with a ship's agent, because the ship's agent is kind of like that go-between. They know about the cruise business, but they also know about the port business, and they're able to kind of make the two meet, right? But we also have our local folks that really help us. So that Milwaukee Cruise Collaborative, Visit Milwaukee, which is the tourism bureau that really makes sure that we're marketed as a city, they work closely with us. So they're welcoming passengers at the airport, at our dock. Mitchell International Airport, of course, they've got to be a partner. And then the local hotels and restaurants. We have a wonderful person, Teresa Nimitz, in our city, who owns a business called Great Lakes Shore Excursions. And she really helps to put together those itineraries. So if you've ever been on a cruise and you get off in those islands and you do those excursions, there are people who are doing that right here in Milwaukee. So they're going to see the art museum and the public museum and Harley Davidson and all of the architecture and all the breweries and all the restaurants. So she helps to coordinate all those things. So we need a lot of partners to make that side of our business happen. And then looking ahead, one of the things that with the port, we are fortunate where we as a city have access to a lot of different water amenities along riverfront and along the lake and the beaches. But we also have a history of manufacturing in our city. And because of that, we had not always been responsible, right? And so there's some legacy contaminants that exist in the rivers. So the Milwaukee, the KK, and the Menominee rivers. There is a huge effort that we are partnering with MMSD, with the Environmental Protection Agency, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. There's a lot of people involved in this effort to really clean up the river. And they call that the area of concern, or the AOC. So Milwaukee, they look at us as a large estuary, and there's work being done to clean up all of that legacy contamination that has happened, because as a town that saw a lot of manufacturing, while it was really good for our economy and for employment and for jobs, it was not necessarily the best thing for the environment because we didn't handle it the way that we should have. So we're trying to fix that. So there's a dredge material management facility that's being constructed right on port property, where they're going to take all of that old contaminated sediment, clean it up responsibly, and then they're going to contain it in this new facility. So imagine like a big box being built out in the water. They're going to use that to put all this contaminated sediment in. Eventually, it will be filled up, and then that will become usable land at the port like decades from now. So if you're familiar with the Lake Express, that is also a former confined disposal facility. So the same process, that land did not exist before, but because they used they took dredge material and filled that land, it became usable land, and then they were able to build that facility. So they're doing that again. We've been able to leverage some funds from the federal government through the EPA. And you see there listed all of the sponsors. So Port Milwaukee, the city, MMSD, the DNR, and We Energies. And I have to point We Energies out because they are one of the only responsible parties left that were part of that contamination. And they've done a lot to go in and clean up the things that they were responsible for. So they're really kind of leading in terms of taking the first steps to clean that up. But that'll be ongoing for years. And you'll kind of see that that work happening as years go on. And then I talked a little bit about that ag facility. What's really good about this facility is that we are not just, we weren't just known for manufacturing. Our city had that, but the region is known for agriculture, right? And so how do farmers and growers get those commodities that they're growing out into international markets? Well, they do it because there's someone able to handle that. And DeLong has stepped in to be that partner. We had a grain terminal that existed at the port. They closed down at the beginning of 2023. And we just happened to be building this facility because DeLong was going to be moving animal feed. So DDGs is what they call it. And it's a byproduct of the ethanol process, right? So the spent grains after they make the ethanol, those DDGs are then used for animal feed. So which is a really good way to manage waste and reduce what we dump, right? And so they were building this facility for animal feed. But when that grain terminal closed, they said, well, wait a minute, there's got to be a way for us to be able to support the growers and the producers to be able to continue to move their product. And so in 2023, we got another grant from the federal government to expand that facility so that they can handle more than one commodity. And so we're excited about that. They've already handled some shipments, again, going back to the port being a year-round port. Through the winter, they were able to move some of those products by barge down the Mississippi because the seaway was closed. And so we're really excited about the potential for this facility and to be able to continue to support growers in our region. And I think that is my last slide. So happy to take any questions you guys had. Yes.
Hey, before take questions, I'm going to pass the baskets around. We're going to have one on each side. Try to keep these on one side, pass them back. There's not many people on this side today. And make sure you repeat the questions for the people at home.
Gotcha.
Because they won't be able to hear it.
Okay. Do you want to get started? What?
Okay, since the mayor wants to expand population of the city and you want to expand, have you thought about entertainment districts with hotels, apartments, restaurants and bars?
All right, so the question was about the mayor's goal to have 1 million people, right? That what you're referring to? And then the port also wanting to expand. And so the way we operate, because we do talk with the mayor is who appoints, so he's technically my boss, so I have to kind of do what he says, right? But we are in tandem, I believe. So when I talked about us building that third cruise dock, there is going to be an opportunity for some development there. And so when we think about development, we're thinking about what does that mean for jobs? What does that mean? How does that impact employment? How does that impact housing? So we are thinking about all of those things, right? And so we want to make sure that we are working that's a great question and very thoughtful. So we do consider all those things. Our work is not directly related to housing, right? When you think about the port, you don't think about people living at the port. And so we have to be thoughtful and really creative about how we support the overall mission of the city. But we definitely think about all those things when we're planning. Absolutely. Question?
Yes, we have a boat called Milwaukee Duffy, and you've probably seen the Duffy boats.
Duffy.
They are environmentally friendly, they are charged overnight, and then they run on, just being charged up, not on putting more crap into the water. But I've been on that a lot, and I've had a chance to see the port. It would really be great if we could get a group of people take that tour, and it'd be fabulous if you would join us, because you could be pointing out, we're seeing it all visually here, but the experience with you. But that is something that you'd be interested in.
So the question was, will the port do a Duffy boat tour? And the answer is yes, we would do that. So let's connect and we can coordinate that. That would be awesome. I think I saw one hand back here. Yep.
Seaway was closed, you would go down, how do you get to the bridge and from Lake Michigan to the?
So the question was, when the seaways closed, having access to the Mississippi River. And so through the Illinois, down through the Illinois River that connects to the Mississippi, we are the northernmost point. So when you think about the inland river system coming all the way up from the Gulf Coast, you come through the Illinois River, get into the Great Lakes. Now there's some rules about how we, or what type of vessel is allowed to do that, because of course, the closer you get to the lakes, the more choppy the water becomes. And so there are certain barges, the barge has to be in a specific condition to be able to access that, but that's how it happens. That's all question here.
Okay, with a growing port, bring in more ships through the seaway, does the port have a role in preventing further invasive species coming into the lake?
Absolutely. So the question was about the port's role in preventing further invasive species. So one thing to understand about when vessels come in through the seaway, they have to go through a series of 15 locks, right? So what that means is, because there's such a difference in elevation, they go into kind of like this box that either adds water in to lift them up or drains the water out to allow them to go down, right? And so as they go through those locks, they are looking for those things, and there's different rules and regulations that vessel owners have to follow to try and prevent that. So there's ballast water, there's rules about the type of water. Yep, I think he's adjusting. So there's different rules that they have to follow in order to ensure that we're protecting ourselves against that. But absolutely, federal regulations, state regulations, and local ordinances all have certain requirements that vessel owners must follow. And then we are there, excuse me, to try and steward and make sure that they're in compliance with that. Yep.
The depth that the ships take, which you determine what is the term, draft, is depending upon how big the ship is and how much weight it's carrying. And you don't want the ship to run into the bottom something.
That's right.
And the lake level fluctuates. And I know we're on 180 feet for a long time, but you didn't have any ice that went there?
Yeah.
You know, what is the lake level now?
Sure. Well, the question was about lake levels. What is the current lake levels and how does that impact draft and depth for the ships? So we work, that's one of the things we work with the Army Corps of Engineers on. They are constantly measuring lake levels. And so we get a readout. I mean, we could get one instantly. I don't do that part. That's engineering, because that's a little technical for me. But they are monitoring that to make sure that we are drafting safely. But when we talked about that confined disposal facility, there is an activity annually called dredging. And that's basically shoveling out the bottom to make sure that we have that draft. And so then when we talk about the confined disposal facility, that's the reason that facilities like that exist, because they're taking that sediment, and it's not always contaminated, right? Some of it is just clean sediment that we need to be able to dredge so that ships can come and go safely. That's where you get into those disposal facilities.
One other question. There is a housing district had a proposal, at least the thing was to put in a secondary seawall.
The breakwater.
Environment friendly, that would be house. You know, is that progressing?
It is. So the question was about the Harbor District's proposal to reinforce the breakwater. And that actually, I'm a member of the Harbor District's board. And so we are in the process of approving the vendor. We just did that, bid out that contract. And so we're working now to finalize that so that work can begin. So you'll probably be seeing something soon.
That seawall will protect the harbor facility?
Well, so the breakwater itself, the question was, will the seawall protect the harbor facilities? There is the breakwater that is out there. If you've ever been out on any of the local river cruises, you know, if you get up to that wall, the other side of it is really rough, right? And so that breakwater, that we call it a breakwater, but it's break wall, is stopping that current from really coming into the harbor. The way that the project for the harbor district is planned is they're going to build something that'll be connected to that. And that's really more for supporting habitat and some vegetation and different things like that that'll be out there. It will absolutely help support, but it's going to depend on the way it is constructed. So there's a lot of work and research that's going into that, but it'll definitely support that work. Yes. Yeah. I saw him here.
Yeah, two questions. One is the rail lines, so that is trains bringing stuff in and then trains bringing stuff back out again?
That's right. So the rail lines, yes, they do bring things in and they do take things out. Yes.
Okay. And the other question is, how did you get trained for this job?
How did I get trained? That is the $1 million question. I didn't. So this is honestly the port director's role is a combination of a lot of things, right? And so my experience through the city, I started in the city's treasurer's office, and then I went into the budget office. And the way I kind of tell the story is the treasurer's office told me how we collect the money. The budget office told me why we need the money. And then the port has given me the experience to understand how we use it, right? And so it all kind of, you just kind of continue to build on one thing after another that you learn. So as the finance manager, you know, my background is business, right? So I have a business degree from Alverno, MBA from Concordia. And so there are certain things that I understand. Maritime was not one of them. And so going into the different meetings and the different collaborating with the different partners, that's really kind of helped me. Now, I will not stand here and act like I have arrived because there's so much more to learn, right? We're constantly learning new things, constantly picking up new ways to do business. So it is a ongoing process. So more to come, right, on that. Yep.
Do you use a pilot in what you have your own pilot?
So the question was, do we have a pilot at the port and do the ships provide them? So they actually provide their own. So, well, let me say, there's a person who operates the ship, the ship's captain. That person works for the vessel owner, right? Now because we come through the seaway and there's a lot of terrain that is very difficult, there are folks called pilots, right? So these are folks who are probably retired maritime folks or folks who went through some training to be able to help the captain of the vessel navigate through the St. Lawrence Seaway. So those are two different things, but we do not hire them. They work for the vessel owner or for the Pilots Association. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So the question was about an app that shows cargo of ships through the Great Lake. There is an app called Marine Tracker, and actually our website is listed here. There's a link to that app on our website. So if you go, there's something, vessel tracking, it'll get you to that. Yep, yep. Yeah. So the question was about international ships that offer rooms to passengers. I am not aware of that. Only the cruise ships that come into the port, you know, you booking a room on those. Those are the only ones that I know about. Yep. Yes.
Can you say something about the size of the ships that are able to come through in comparison to like in the harbor in New York and also?
Absolutely.
What's the economy of being able for a ship to come in all the way from the ocean versus trucks or a train?
Yeah, so the question was about the size of the ship. So in order to get into the seaway, I believe the max, and I might get this wrong, it's about 760 feet is the largest that a vessel can be to come in through the seaway. So that's going to be much smaller than what you see out on the coast, right? The way that we look at the economy in terms of whether it's more economic to move cargo by vessel or by train or by rail, at some point, most of that cargo is going to hit some other mode of transportation. But with it coming through the seaway, what the advantage you have is there's capacity because the amount of cargo that you can move on a vessel is way much more than what you'd be able to move on a truck or a train. It's also much safer, right? because as the question talked about the pilots and the captains, these are folks who are trained to be able to navigate through the seaway. When you get on the freeway, you know who you're driving next to, right? So even though the truck driver is trained, that 16-year-old who's got her driver's permit might not be, right? And so it's much safer. And then when you talk about rail, you know, there are folks who are trained on rail, but they also have to pass through communities where there are drivers and people who may not necessarily understand the risk of driving next to something that's carrying large amounts of cargo that's that heavy. And so we talk about not only the cost of it and being able to be more economical and moving more cargo at once, but also about it being the safest way to move cargo as well. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I heard a talk by somebody from the harbor number of years ago, and they were saying they get all their energy from the windmill out there.
Ah, so the question about the windmill, we call that the wind turbine. And so if you go across 794, you'll see it, right? And that's right where our port administration building is. So they don't necessarily get it. That turbine actually provides all the energy to operate our building. And then any surplus is sold back to We Energy. So the way I joke with people is every month you have to send We Energy the check. Every month they send us one. So that's how that works. Yeah.
It gives you the energy.
Yeah. So it operates, yep, to operate our building. Yes, sir. I will take a note. Thank you. No, I appreciate the feedback. He said that we should put the wind turbine in a slide. So we'll do that. Thank you.
Of all the things I heard in that talk, that really impressed me.
Okay, great, great. Good. That's good to know. Thank you. Yes.
One of my favorite old ladies is the St. Mary's Challenge.
Ah,
Noticing her and her part in
well, I will say if you ever are driving down First Street and you drive past, you can get really, you get a real good view because St. Mary's Challenger is parked almost, I mean, right next to the street when it's docked here. But that vessel was owned by St. Mary's that is a tenant at the port. And I don't know a lot about vessels, so, but I do know that I've been on a couple of them. Very impressive. And what we like to talk to young people about, because that's one of our goals too, is to expose more young people to the maritime industry, because I don't think enough of them really consider it as a career option. But when we talk about it, we talk about all the different needs of a vessel, right? Because it's not just the folks who are moving cargo. There's the folks that are making sure the ship is safe. They're the folks who have to feed the folks who are doing all that work. And so there's a lot of different jobs in maritime. And so that's one where we use that kind of as an example, because that's one that's really relatable and a lot of them have seen it before. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. So the question was, have we participated in Doors Open Milwaukee? Absolutely, we do. Every year we do. And we offer a kind of a presentation, something like this one. And then they're able to go out on a bus and tour the port. Yes, we participate every year. Yes, sir. That is, yep. So the question was about contamination and what kind of contamination are we talking about? Yeah, when there were We Energies had the coal, when there were the tanneries and dumping things like that, there's a lot of different things. So think about manufacturers that were along the river and the way that they dispose of that wasn't really thoughtful, because we weren't thinking about today, right? We were thinking about what we're doing at the moment and really didn't think about the impact. And so now we're trying to fix that. Yes.
How do you partner with the Great Lakes Water Institute, and what kind of relationship do you have with them today, and what do you see in the future?
Well, I will tell you now you're quizzing me, because there's so many groups called Great Lakes something or another.
I mean, the one down at the end of what is Greenfield?
Oh, the School of Freshwater Science.
There you go.
So see. So the question was about how do we partner with the School of Freshwater Science. We are not directly tied to them, but we are partners with the Harbor District. If they have research that they want to do, we try and participate and collaborate them as we need to. But there's a lot of different organizations and groups that are focused on making sure that we maintain and respect the waterways. So we partner with a lot of those groups to do that. Yep. Yep.
You mentioned, somebody, I think that does the like, cultural elements of what they're gonna see when they come in at these courts. I'm wondering if there is somebody that is telling them about the incredible geology we have here in Wisconsin, the Great Lakes and the glacial history and all that.
So actually, the question was about whether there's someone who is talking about the geology of the Great Lakes. So those cruise ships that are coming in, specifically, I'll point out Viking. So the cruise ships that come in the Great Lakes are called expedition cruises, right? So these are folks not necessarily looking to have a drink with an umbrella in it, sitting out on the beach. These are folks looking for an experience. And a lot of those vessels are equipped with the type of equipment to study that kind of thing. So Viking actually has scientists on board the vessel who are doing research, they've got weather balloons, they're doing all kinds of things that are related to the geology of the area. They're strategic about decorating the vessel, depending on where they're stopping. So the types of birds that you will see in the region that you're about to go into, they look at all of those things. So most of the vessels come equipped where they're talking to the folks on board about that. These are not vessels where there's like a band playing and parties every night. They're going to symposiums and learning about or being educated about the terrain and the water and the species and the environment and all those aspects of the region. Yes, yes.
I think mentioned what is there a connection to that exchange?
So the question was about commodities, specifically agriculture, and what's the connection to the folks who are buying. So there are a lot of different groups that are advocating for grain, and just like any other industry, right? There's going to be people who get around something and want to make sure that folks understand how important it is. So the one that we work closely with is the Soy Grains Council. And so they're doing a lot of work to make sure that the folks who need those services are connected to us. They also partner with DeLong, who's the business that operates that terminal, so that folks are aware of it. Yeah. Any others? Well, thank you guys so much. This was great. So.
We have a tour to look forward to.
That's
so
right.
We're going to work that out. I have a.
Oh, great.
And don't forget, there is a forum listserv. It's the fan club for forum. If you're interested in knowing more about forum, you can sign up for that and talk to Mark about that. And then you'll know more about the tour too. So, okay. Thank you so much for coming. It's fascinating. Yeah, just.
I wish.